focus of right now. Wilder, Fury 2, here we go.
Tweet from Michael Benson. Alexander Usyk and Joyce are reportedly now close to a deal to fight for a WBO interim belt next, meaning Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury would be able to proceed for undisputed. Usyk versus Joyce would be a part of a step-aside deal for Usyk. And I'm very glad to see that, things were able to be ironed out between Usyk, between Joshua, between Fury, and between Joe. I very much like this fight. This would be a sequel to Joe and Alexander's original meeting in the World Series of Boxing.
Except this ain't gonna be no 5-rounder.
This contest would presumably be a 12-round professional boxing match for an interim title. I've discussed the relevance of that in previous videos, and it's simple. Maybe Alexander Usyk was able to do to Joyce what he did to Joyce in the World Series of Boxing over the course of 5 rounds because, it was only 5 rounds.
That's it.
For context, consider this. Consider that in Joyce's last outing, 3 out of 3 judges had Daniel Dubois up after the first 5 rounds. So if the match would have ended after the 5th, if that fight were a 5-rounder, Joyce would have never got the chance to stop Daniel Dubois the way that he did.
In the 10th.
Whatever Usyk did to Joe way back when, that was in a 5-rounder. A 5-rounder.
In the big leagues now.
So can Alexander Usyk replicate what he did in the World Series of Boxing over the course of 5 rounds?
Just 5.
Here today in 2021 over the course of 12 rounds?
That's the question.
Originally, when I broached this subject, it had slipped my mind that, at least based on reports, Alexander Usyk is out of contract with Matchroom. He's not contractually obligated to fight under the banner. And in light of this news, I wonder where this proposed Usyk-Joyce fight will take place. Will it take place on BT? Will it take place under the Queensberry Promotions banner? Because
they ain't got Matchroom's reach.
Remember, this entire engagement is an arm of Usyk's step-aside deal.
That's what this is.
I'm pretty sure that he wanted to be paid handsomely in order to step aside.
Can he be paid handsomely on BT?
I'll tell you something. Frank Warren ain't world-renowned for overpaying fighters. It's never been Old Fish Eye's M.O. That's never been part of his reputation. The relevance of all of this is, where does the fight take place? Who gets the right to air the fight? BT Sport get those rights, or is it Sky and DAZN? Either way, I'm tuning in regardless of who the broadcaster is.
Usyk's not under contract.
So, in theory, he can go wherever he wants.
In theory.
He can fight under most any promotional banner that will have him. It's just that this being part of a step-aside deal in association with a Matchroom fighter, that fighter being Anthony Joshua, one is left to wonder if Usyk
won't fight under Matchroom again.
One way or another, we're going to find out. In other news, just in reference to that ongoing story involving Ryan Garcia, Manny Pacquiao, and whatever engagement they've got going on, whether it's an exhibition match or otherwise, very interesting is that, Michael Benson tweeted that the event is set to be an exhibition match, at least reportedly, but Sean Gibbons, who actually has the inside track on Manny Pacquiao, he said that no one said it was going to be an exhibition match.
So it's not an exhibition match?
Is it an actual fight? Those details are still in the air here today. Though in reference to that engagement, whatever kind of engagement it is, exhibition match or otherwise, Gervonta Davis tweeted, Ryan Garcia is about to do an exhibition with Manny Pacquiao. I definitely don't want the fight anymore. I'm on to the next. To which Devin Haney replied, for once, we could agree. And I find Gervonta Davis's comments quite comical. I mean, that's what brought me to this story. That Gervonta Davis is essentially what?
Walking away?
Taking the fight off the table altogether?
What do you mean you don't want the fight anymore?
That fight wasn't going to happen next anyway, and you fucking know it. You fucking know it. Before that announcement involving Manny Pacquiao, before that entire fiasco even got off the ground, I wasn't convinced that Ryan and Gervonta were going to fight next anyway. You're just using that as an excuse.
That's exactly what he's doing.
In reference to this fight, you couldn't even get a straight answer out of Leonard Ellerby as to whether or not that fight was going to be next, and that's before this Pacquiao stuff started. We talked about it here on the channel. I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. So who the hell is Gervonta Davis trying to kid? They couldn't even get a straight answer out of his promoter as to whether or not that was going to be Gervonta Davis's next engagement. The fact of the matter is, whatever Ryan has going on with Manny Pacquiao, the guy who several of your stablemates that are on your side of the street, the guy who they keep name-dropping, the guy who they're climbing over each other just to get a chance to smell his cologne.
That guy.
Ryan Garcia wasn't lying when he says he's got something coming up with a bigger name than the name of Gervonta Davis. He wasn't lying when he said that. And given how several of Gervonta Davis's stablemates would readily put anything and everything else on the back burner to do something with Manny Pacquiao...
Anything.
Why don't you just cut the crap? You weren't going to fight that guy next anyway. You're just using this as an excuse to walk away. And if you are, in fact, walking away from the Ryan Garcia fight, justified or otherwise, what's stopping you from fighting Devin Haney, eh? I got a novel idea. Instead of agreeing with each other on Twitter about what Ryan Garcia is going to do in his next fight, why don't you two guys fight each other? How about that? I wonder who it is Gervonta Davis is going to be fighting next. I used to think that, in all likelihood, Gary Russell Jr. would be the next featherweight they brought up to super featherweight to feed Gervonta Davis, since he's got an affinity for feasting on naturally smaller fighters. But it seems like the PBC is a little bit more invested in the featherweight division here today than they have been in previous years. They made a very sizable offer to Kid Galahad, who could very soon become the IBF's featherweight champion. It seems that the PBC have plans on pouring money into that division, and perhaps Gary Russell Jr., the reigning WBC featherweight champion, perhaps he's a part of that picture? Really not sure.
Maybe they don't feed him to Gervonta.
But either way, I was never convinced Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia was going to be either of those two guys' next engagement. Either of those two guys' next fight. That's Pacquiao or no Pacquiao. Garcia versus Davis was never going to be next.
That's why you couldn't even get a straight answer out of Leonard.
There are issues that need reconciliation in association with such a match. There are network issues, promotional issues. Ryan Garcia is a Golden Boy Promotions fighter that fights on DAZN, and Gervonta Davis is a Mayweather Promotions fighter that fights exclusively on Showtime.
You guys never cleared that hurdle.
Just stop it. In other news, Caleb Plant says, "I'm the big dog at 168. I'm not chasing nobody." He was quoted as saying, "I'll be here for a long time. I'm not chasing anybody. I'm the champion. I'm the world champion. I'm the big dog at 168. So I'm not going to see anybody. They've got to come see me."
That's self-belief, folks.
That is Caleb Plant's opinion, and I suppose that he is entitled to it. It's just that the boxing community, they have their own opinions.
They're entitled to
And
them.
a rather large portion of them will disagree with Caleb Plant. He's not the big dog at 168 pounds.
No.
Canelo Alvarez is. Allow me to be Captain Obvious here, but this assertion that Caleb Plant is making, that he's the big dog at 168, that he doesn't have to go see anyone, that's an assertion that is neither proven nor earned.
He can say what he wants.
In the greater scheme of things, we all can. But that doesn't make it true, now does it? In the case of Caleb Plant, what I think we're looking at here are the beginnings.
What these comments herald
Are a difficult set of negotiations between Canelo Alvarez and Caleb Plant once Canelo gets around to Caleb for the third time. That's what I think this is. That's what I think we're looking at. After Canelo is done with Avni Yildirim, provided he beats him, and after Canelo Alvarez is done with Billy Joe Saunders, provided he beats him as well.
Caleb will hold the last piece of the puzzle.
I don't know. Still very early, but I'm getting the sneaking suspicion that Caleb Plant might handle this situation the way that Deontay Wilder handled the Anthony Joshua situation. He's a PBC fighter, isn't he? Didn't Canelo Alvarez go to this guy 2 times already? And
The fight didn't get made.
why would Caleb Plant feel it necessary to assert himself as the big dog at 168 pounds?
Big dog?
Is it because there's mounting pressure placed upon him to face Canelo Alvarez, who's already gone to him for a fight 2 times, and so far 2 times the fight hasn't happened? Why would Caleb Plant deem it necessary to make that kind of an assertion?
Who's he trying to kid?
I mean, that's the feeling I get as I read this article, that what we might be looking at are the preliminary stages of what could be a very difficult set of negotiations between Caleb Plant and Canelo Alvarez, who I have no doubts would try to use that final puzzle piece, that IBF title, as leverage to
Set an astronomical asking price.
by the time Canelo Alvarez gets around to picking up that third world title
WBO.
from Billy Joe Saunders, provided he's victorious, by the time that Canelo Alvarez has already put in the legwork, what Caleb Plant is then going to do is use that final puzzle piece, that IBF title, to price himself out. That's what I think these comments herald. That's what I think they indicate. Caleb, he's got this Caleb Truax title defense coming up. Caleb doesn't seem to place any emphasis on the David Benavidez fight, at least not anymore, because David Benavidez doesn't have a world title. He's not a world champion. Thus, there's not much to be gained in fighting him. He's putting the David Benavidez fight on the back burner, knowing that at some point, Canelo Alvarez is going to come knocking on his door again.
He doesn't need David anymore.
I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if the year of 2021 comes and goes and Caleb Plant and David Benavidez never fight. That wouldn't surprise me at all, because at this point, David Benavidez doesn't have anything that Caleb Plant wants. David Benavidez doesn't have anything that Caleb Plant needs. And Caleb knows that the biggest name in boxing, in this part of the world, the biggest name anywhere at or around 168 pounds, at some point,
Gonna be knocking on his door.
Caleb Plant is closer to landing that Canelo Alvarez fight than David Benavidez and most any and every other guy in the super middleweight division. So what's he need from David Benavidez?
Nothing.
I think that is the headspace that Caleb Plant is in. I think that is a part of what's going on. And whether or not you guys out there want to judge him harshly for it, well, I'll leave such judgments up to you. But if you want my opinion, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, that is what I think is going on. Caleb Plant no longer puts any priority, any emphasis on David Benavidez, because it's not a unification fight anymore. David did it to himself, and Caleb also knows that at some point Canelo Alvarez is going to come back around to try and collect that last puzzle piece.
All he's got to do is hang on to it.
So you hypothesize that if Caleb Plant is successful in this upcoming title defense against Caleb Truax, if he keeps his belt, maybe he don't fight for the rest of the year, or at least until Canelo Alvarez comes back around. Canelo Alvarez has got a fight coming up in February, then a unification match in May. If when the smoke settles, Canelo Alvarez is in possession of 3 of the 4 alphabet titles, Caleb Plant won't have to come see Canelo, because Canelo will come see him, the way he came to see him the last 2 times.
That's what I think's going on.
Now, as far as Canelo, who we just mentioned, Canelo Alvarez was quoted as saying, Munguia has potential, but for now, I don't want to face another Mexican. He was quoted as saying, I represent Mexico, and I do not like to fight with Mexicans. I do not see any sense in doing that. Jaime Munguia has potential, but he still has some fights to go before he reaches this level. I'm not closing the door to anything, but for now, I would not like to fight another Mexican fighter, Canelo told TV Azteca. Yet another scenario that Canelo Alvarez is going to avoid is a fight at light heavyweight. His trainer and manager, Eddie Reynoso, does not want his boxer to give up too many advantages by facing top names at 175. Eddie doesn't want us to go up to 175 pounds again. It's giving away a lot of advantages. I want to go for all the titles in the division of 168 pounds. That's the goal, and we'll see what happens next, Canelo said. Canelo will return to the ring February 27th when he faces mandatory challenger Avni Yildirim in Miami, Florida. I would have loved to fight in Mexico, but unfortunately it cannot happen due to COVID-19. We hope we can make it happen in the future. The idea is to fill a stadium. As time progresses, we will see what happens. You know, I can actually forgive Canelo Alvarez deciding that he's not going to make a return to the light heavyweight division, because if I'm being honest, he doesn't belong up there. There are plenty of fighters that are allowed to operate with impunity, having not fought in 2, 3, let alone 4 weight classes like Canelo Alvarez. And these fighters really aren't subject to harsh criticisms, are they? Fighters like Errol Spence Jr., fighters like Gennady Golovkin.
Everybody's ceiling is different.
And I think that at 175 pounds, Canelo Alvarez has reached his.
He'd be biting off more than he can chew up there.
Understand that it's not exactly a requisite that a fighter move up in weight. It's something that eventually happens when a fighter outgrows a division, or sometimes a fighter makes a decision to move up in weight because there are better money fights upstairs. Fighter can move up for more reasons than one.
That's the moral of the story.
And it's not a requisite, per se, It's often looked at as a year mark of a fighter's excellence, how many divisions a fighter can climb to and maintain a successful track record in the process. It is a benchmark for a fighter's skills, for a fighter's ability. But everyone has limits, everyone has a ceiling, and at 175 pounds, Canelo Alvarez has reached his. And for that, I can forgive him not returning to the light heavyweight division. What I can't forgive, however, is this assertion that he doesn't want to fight his countrymen. Could you imagine if either Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury, or the both of them as a package, decided that they're not going to fight each other for the undisputed heavyweight championship? They're going to make the decision to not bring that historical event into fruition because they both come from the same place?
What?
They fly the same flag? Do you realize how many fights wouldn't have happened in the annals of boxing history if, guys who came from the same place, the same country, flew the same flags, decided that on that premise, they're not going to fight each other?
What kind of a position is that to take?
Yes, Canelo Alvarez represents Mexico, but so do several other fighters. And I think that those other fighters want the opportunity to represent Mexico the same way Canelo does, but in competition.
At least some of them want to prove they're the best.
That's the point. And this stance that Canelo Alvarez is taking is very hard to reconcile, very hard to justify. It's very hard to understand. The saving grace for Canelo Alvarez is that given what he's trying to do, unify the super middleweight division, he won't have to face any of his countrymen in order to do so.
That's the silver lining.
He could very well unify every single alphabet title at 168 pounds and not have to face a single one of his own countrymen in order to do so. There are those out there who interpret this stance that Canelo Alvarez is taking as a means to avoid a fight with David Benavidez, that if he's saying this, David is the reason, David is the why. And given how peculiar this stance is,
I won't dismiss it.
I won't, but when it comes to David, I just don't pity him. I think he painted himself into a corner. I think that whatever he's experiencing now is a self-inflicted wound. Perhaps it would be easier to corner Canelo Alvarez and goad him into having a fight with you if you didn't blow the weight and lose your title on the scales.
That's your fault.
Then Canelo Alvarez wouldn't be able to go undisputed without seeing you at some point.
And maybe you'd still be a priority to Caleb Plant as well.
But if you're not, it's because you did it to yourself. You've got no one to blame for what's going on but you. I don't know that Canelo's saying what he's saying specifically because of David.
That's quite a leap.
I'm just saying that even if he is, David Benavidez isn't helping his own situation.
I think he might as well go up to 175 at this point.
He doesn't have anything that anyone wants, and most any other contenders out there looking to move into the super middleweight division, make a name for themselves, will view him as a high-risk, low-reward kind of guy.